skies choked with black smoke, a country savaged by fire. This was the Gulf War legacy of the fleeing Iraqis in the early months of 1991. The oil fields of Kuwait were transformed into a desert inferno. To astronauts engaged in a NASA shuttle mission far above the Earth, the horrific panorama was unmistakable. Of the more than 1,100 wells that covered the country, over 720 were sabotaged. Hundreds of square miles of desert set ablaze. Now the smoke-filled lair of fire-belching monsters spewing angry geysers of oil and gas into the air over 100 feet high. Here, a new battle was about to begin. An elite force of warriors called into action.
Never before had we seen 700 wells blowing out. There were times where we could stand on one hill and see 40 or 50 wells and on fire, and something of that magnitude is just something that you could never dream of and probably will never see again.
The Kuwait Oil Company was preparing plans to deal with the numerous oil fires as early as November of 1990. No one could predict the scope of the disaster. The Kuwaiti infrastructure would be devastated by the Iraqis. Technical and well records, maps and files destroyed. To coordinate an effective fighting force, immense problems with communications, transportation, power, and water supply would have to be overcome, and more than 145,000 tons of equipment delivered to Kuwait from great distances. A huge logistical problem, yet by October 1991, 27 firefighting teams from around the globe would have been mobilized to assault the massive fires burning in Kuwait's oil fields. As early as March of '91, teams were waging firefighting campaigns in the Ahmadi region and dangerously close to the Iraqi border, less than 10 kilometers away in the Sabria and Bara oil fields. A team of firefighters and blowout specialists from Houston, Texas would be called upon to meet the challenge.
We took 8 of our top specialists over there and combined that with 11 of the British top experts and went in and looked at the field and found out what was going to be required to handle all the wells, all the gathering centers, all the flow lines, and refurbish all of that. That's what we call the damage assessment survey.
The Kuwaiti British Group Limited won a contract to refurbish 2 of the northern fields. And once they completed their lengthy negotiations with the Kuwaitis, they were able to turn over firefighting responsibilities to the Neal team of professionals who moved quickly into action.
We used a lot of our own experience on firefighting and well control in designing our equipment. When we evaluated the fields over there and were able to see firsthand what the situation was, it allowed us to fine-tune designs on equipment that we planned to take over there to particularly address the situation in Kuwait.
Logistical challenges were successfully met by the Neal team, achieving a shorter mobilization period than that of other companies. In only a few weeks, special equipment was constructed and readied for shipment. Upon arrival in Kuwait, the equipment was shipped to site, rigged and operating in only 4 days. Now the firefighters faced another hurdle, the extreme working conditions of the Sabria field. Here, furnace-like heat from the well fires, combined with desert temperatures of up to 125 degrees Fahrenheit, causing problems of dehydration and heat prostration.
The environment in Kuwait was probably something that most people will never face in their lives. We worked up in North Kuwait. We didn't have the protective cloud covering that many of the other firefighters did in South Kuwait. We had to face not only the heat from the fires, but intense sunlight in that desert condition every day, the sun bearing down off the sand and bouncing back on us. It was hot, it was dry, it took a lot out of you.
The wind storms would get up to probably 40 miles an hour, and found ourselves eating grit and sand in the eyes, and just plain breathing that stuff out there, along with the smoke and everything else.
Blowing wells have a tremendously loud noise. I would compare it to standing next to a 747 jet when it's revving its engines up. You have to have ear protection. It's very difficult to communicate verbally with other people. So we usually use hand signals to make sure people understand what we want.
We had, I think, one big sandstorm while we were there, which the sandstorm was so bad it pitted all the windows of the car. You couldn't see. You couldn't work in it because your visibility was barely past the end of the hood of the car. So you could find your way up to the field, but then you couldn't do any work. But when the sandstorms blew in, it was intense.
It was really like stepping into another world. It was. I talked to a lot of people who had been there before I got there, and they tried to describe it to me, and I've tried to describe it to people since I've gotten back. But it's really something you'd have to stand in the middle of and witness, because words just can't really do it justice.
One day you'd go out and it would be just like anywhere else, and then the next day the smoke would be held down low, and it was like looking at the moon more than the sun. It was eerie.
There were situations where you look back at it now and laugh. I pulled a forklift up sideways to a well to get a monitor shed pulled over, and the seat I was sitting on was bubbling, and your clothes are smoking. You're wondering whether or not your overalls are going to burst into flames at any minute and stuff. It's an experience.
Unseen dangers had to be dealt with as well. The thick tar-covered sands could hide unexploded bombs dropped by the coalition forces, and landmines, grenades, and other live ordnance left behind by the Iraqis. Safe areas were flagged, but ordnance teams cautioned that their clearance efforts could not be counted on as 100% effective.
I'm always worried about my own personal safety, but you have to, as a leader, you got to be worried about all the men that are working for you. Everywhere we went, there were grenades on the ground, or mortars, or rocket launchers, just everywhere that you went.
Unconsumed oil spewed forth from the wells, creating dark swamps and lakes, some covering miles of desert. One could only wonder what manner of explosives waited beneath the oily surface. In many cases, these oil lakes became immense ground fires, ignited by well fires or radiant heat. To quell the tempest blocking access to the wells, a blanket of sand and gravel called gatch is trucked in and spread over the fires with bulldozers. In this bleak and battered landscape, the Neal Adams team gathers to tame the wild wells of northern Kuwait. Into the din and stench and heat they come, to work exhausting 12-hour shifts 7 days a week, letting up only when the wind dies and smoke and fumes overpower the senses. A band of elite professionals called to combat these monster fires, bringing with them years of hands-on well kill experience, unique technical capabilities, and sound engineering expertise. Extensive knowledge that will empower the team to meet their most difficult challenge in Kuwait, the beheading of Sabria Well 41.
Well 41 in Sabria Field was a nightmare. It had the biggest coke pile of any of the wells that we had seen. It was one of the biggest wells out there. You compound the fact that it's a big well and a big coke pile, that makes it a big blast furnace. And you've got to get in there and try to work around that well. That was one of the problems. And then the Iraqis had mined the well in such a way that the whole well was destroyed. No matter what you tried to do, there was some component of the well had been blown apart, and you just couldn't do it the way you, textbook fashion, the way you wanted to do it. So you had to keep exercising your contingency plans. You try the simplest, most efficient thing. That didn't work. You'd go to the next more complicated thing. and we had to exercise all of our options and all our experiences on 41 to finally get it taken care of.
At Sabria 41, as with any well kill operation, the first point of order is to snuff the fire.
One of the questions I'm always asked is, how do you go about putting out the fire on a well? There's several ways that you can do it, and I think that how a particular company does it depends on their experiences and their own preferences. You can use water and just water, or you can use explosives, or you can use foam or nitrogen. You got to remember the three principles to have a fire. You got to have a fuel, and you got to have an ignition source, and you got to have oxygen. You take any one of the three away, and you don't have a fire anymore. We used water with our special design pumps to spray on the fire and cool it down below the ignition temperature, and the fire goes out. We found that to be most effective. We also found it to be the safest because water never blows up in your face like explosives can sometimes. Explosives momentarily deprives a fire of oxygen. At that point, the fire goes out. If it stays cool, it won't reignite. And so that's the basis behind explosives. But whether you use explosives or nitrogen, you still got to have water to cool the area. So our philosophy is if you got to have water anyway, why not just use it exclusively? It's going to be the safest thing, and you've always got an ocean full of water that we can use.
The Persian Gulf is the initial source of water for all of the firefighting operations in Kuwait. Before the last well is controlled, 1.5 billion gallons of seawater will be pumped from the Gulf to water lagoons the size of small lakes, positioned at the various oil fields. This seawater will travel over 60 miles to service the Sabria field, where high-pressure water cannons blast flames of over 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit.
With respect to the pumps that we use in Kuwait, we felt like we needed a little different design than what we believe was the industry standard. We wanted something that would be mobile, we could easily move it and get it where we wanted it, and something we could rig up very quickly.
Our pumps would put out 2,400 GPMs, and it gave me a foot head of 325 foot. With that, I could reach anywhere. And in our design, we took two pumps to equal one of the so-called firefighting pumps. If I lost one, which never happened, but if I lost one, I would still have half my water power there, and there wouldn't be any jeopardy to anybody else as a safety factor that was in there working.
This fire is no match for a curtain of seawater pumped at over 4,000 gallons a minute from a nearby holding pond. Always searching for ways to improve operations, the Neal Adams team has transformed irrigation piping into a complete firefighting system. Ring lock connections have been introduced into the design of the lightweight yet rugged aluminum piping to permit fast, easy assembly. The large bore piping selected by the team reduces pressure losses, giving the water cannons enough force to vanquish Sabria well number 2. It's another story, however, at well 41. Like many in Kuwait, the well has been blowing at a rate of thousands of barrels of oil per day for months on end, causing a heavy buildup of coke around the work site. These burning deposits have the consistency of pumice or lava rock, some piles as high as 40 feet. And like charcoal in a barbecue pit, the coke intensifies the radiant heat from the well.
The coke was a real problem that was unique to Kuwait. You don't have coke in any other situations around the world. It occurs or is formed due to a well blowing for a long time, and you don't have the hydrocarbons that are completely burning for whatever the reason. It forms a pumice-like material that's hard, and you got to get it out of there. We found that by cooling the coke and allowing it to shatter, the first time you sprayed water on the coke, it would shatter and blow rock fragments everywhere. And we would go in and start scraping it away, but it was a challenge, and you had to work and you had to get it out.
Pooling oil around the base of 41's wellhead continues to fuel the fire. Seawater isn't enough to battle the blaze. To quell the flames, the Neal Adams team uses a special weapon, their custom-designed Athey wagon, a rugged piece of equipment called into action at all the team's well kill operations in Kuwait. it is actually easy to maneuver for precise placement. Unlike the triangular-shaped boom that is an industry standard, it's designed for more efficiency with a square-shaped boom. The new shape makes it stronger, more than 50% laterally and over 100% vertically.
We also went to pin connections, which makes for quick assembly and dismantling much quicker than using flange-type connections. It takes a number of bolts per connection. We can use the pins, and it goes together like a lot of oil field equipment that's pinned together. I like to say that it's bulletproof because it's about like that. It's very tough and can be used for long periods of time without being affected by the heat or the smashing around with the boom.
The team's use of a stinger proved particularly effective in several of their Kuwaiti well kill operations.
We also custom designed and built our stingers that we used on some of the wells. We decided to make them a little bit more versatile and easier to use because we knew we would have multiple operations in Kuwait. For one thing, we made the connections of the stinger mount that was to go on the ATHI wagon pin connected again so that it's easy to get on and off. And the stingers themselves, we had a variety of tips and a nut type arrangement that we could undo, exchange a tip, make it back up with a nut in a very short period of time.
A stinger is an oil field firefighting tool that is shoved into the top of the well, creating an effective seal, allowing the team to pump high-density fluids down into the well to kill it. To cap well 41, the team will call several techniques into play. They begin by removing twisted steel from the mangled wellhead and assessing the damage. To still the dragon, several attempts will be made with stingers in a variety of shapes and sizes. This particular stinger is a round metal tool. The team begins working it into the wounded wellhead. Communication is difficult in the deafening noise, and hand signals must be used by the men to facilitate optimum placement. But the egg-shaped pipe is out of round, and the stinger fails to create an efficient seal. Well 41 refuses to die, so the men implement the contingency plan, a direct assault with their special ATHI wagon. The attack is successful. The ATHI wagon knocks off the wellhead, snuffing the fire.
We used our heavy-duty ATHI wagon and moved in position and knocked the wellhead off completely so that we could get the flow going vertical. And in the process of knocking the wellhead off and in combination with the high volume of water that we were spraying on, the fire was extinguished and the flow became vertical.
Now comes the most dangerous stage of blowout control. Under a steady rain of seawater and gushing oil, the men work steadily to cap the well. The danger comes from heavy accumulations of gas and other hydrocarbons around the well site. Stray sparks could reignite the volatile area, so only non-sparking pneumatic tools and hand tools are used, and strict safety procedures followed.
We're real proud of our safety record here. We've worked hard to achieve what we have. Other than a few aching muscles of a long, hard day's work, we've never had anybody hurt, even in a minor fashion, and that's important.
It is a sobering testament to the danger of the work that at some other firefighting operations in Kuwait, injuries and death did occur. However, the Neal Adams safety record speaks for itself. The company has never suffered any injuries or casualties on the job. The men work relentlessly back at Sabria 41. The well will blow for several days. Overnight wind shifts cause a thick coating of oil to blow back over the work site, covering everything in its path. In the end, the men will have to excavate further down into the well site to a depth of nearly 30 feet, cutting the casing to allow for the placement of a capping stack. The stack is closed to stop the flow, and mud is pumped into Sabria 41. The beast is finally silent.
It's a great feeling when you're able to kill a well. You know, you can never appreciate the forces of Mother Nature till you've seen her blow out at her worst. Enormous pressures and volumes, and I think Kuwait, you can really see that. But when you go out there and you plan what you're going to do, and when it works well, it's a great feeling. It's real tough to describe what it's like when you put your people together and you put their heads together and you got the equipment that you want, and it all clicks for you. It's a real good feeling.
It's what you go out to do, and you know you're going to do it, but still when it's done, it's not relief. It's more like, you know, you've killed the monster.
Members of Neal Adams firefighters worked with 2 French blowout control teams from Horwell in Kuwait's Roudatain oil field. Neal Adams supplied team leaders and firefighting equipment for all of the Horwell operations. And prior to their arrival in Kuwait, all French team members were trained at the Houston offices of Neal Adams firefighters. Over the years, many have called upon the expertise of Neal Adams firefighters. The company brings to its operations over 100 years combined individual staff experience in a broad range of offshore and onshore firefighting, well control, and related oil field capabilities. Members of the team have participated in some of the most difficult blowouts in the industry's history. They were on the scene in 1988 at the Piper Alpha disaster in the North Sea, drilling the relief well. The team has also been called into well kill situations after other attempts have failed, such as Cook Inlet, Alaska, where they successfully concluded operations in shallow gas blowout control with a semi-submersible. The team's success in Kuwait did not go unnoticed. At a formal well capping ceremony held in the Bergan field, to which several team members were invited, the Emir of Kuwait personally congratulated Neal Adams on the company's efforts, and a commemorative plaque was given to the team. The oil fires of Kuwait presented a monumental challenge to all who participated in the firefighting efforts. The burning wells consume 3% of the Kuwaiti oil reserves, spilling 120 million barrels into the desert. An estimated $1.5 billion was spent to slay the well-fired dragons. The ultimate cost, environmental damage, is still being calculated. In the end, a total of 727 wild wells were controlled, half in the first 6 months of the campaign, and the remaining half in the final 2 months. Against many of the predictions and critical assessments, the International Firefighting Force was able to complete their formidable mission in only 8 months, a remarkable finish for a project that also came in under the expected costs. For years to come, the success of the operation in Kuwait will stand as a tribute to the unflagging efforts of all who came to meet the challenge.
When I look back on Kuwait, I saw some new technical innovations come about. And we saw a lot of people around the world begin to think about blowout control and what we can do to make it more efficient and how we can stop these things. And I'm hopeful that we see that trend continue so that these sorts of disasters, whether it's 700 at a time or whether it's just one, we can avoid them, or when they do occur, that we can control them quickly and without any loss of life.